Hello there, my very good friends. Andy here for What Culture Wrestling, and today we're going to talk about something that many people believe to be one of the biggest problems faced by all elite wrestling. Roster bloat. And, to be fair, in good faith, yeah, it kind of is a problem. There are a lot of people on this company's roster, too many for TV in fact, and the recruitment drive isn't slowing down. And in my opinion, the recruitment drive shouldn't slow down. If a talented person suddenly becomes available who your audience is going to connect with, who you can make money with, who is going to make your product better on the whole, well, you don't pass that opportunity up. You snap them up. If Keith Lee comes onto the open market, as he is now, you don't turn your nose up at signing him just because you've got a bunch of other people already on the roster. But for all AEW's successes over the past 3 years, and there have been many of them, the company does currently have more wrestlers than it could ever hope to book fairly, or evenly I guess, across TNT and TBS. I mean, take a guy like Tony Nese, for example. He came into AEW in October. That's when he debuted. He wrestled his first TV match on the 3rd of December, that episode of Rampage. Since then, nothing. So that's 3 months of employment and 1 match on actual television. And that's not me actively campaigning for Tony Nese to be in every main event or whatever, even though he's a very talented guy and they could put him on TV a little bit more. It's just a general overall point. AEW signs a lot of people, and because there are so many other people already in the company vying for spots, sometimes they make a debut and they kind of go missing. People like Jay Lethal, for example, are in a very similar situation. As things stand, 3 hours of weekly TV, well, it just isn't enough to accommodate every wrestler adequately that's currently on this company's books. Now, one thing that will ease the situation somewhat and bring the roster number down, at least for a while, is that we know AEW has a bunch of contract renewals that are due this year. Amongst them will be a bunch of the 3-year contracts originally signed by first-year wrestlers in 2019. Some of them are not going to be renewed, and we already know that Tony Khan, as a promoter, he's not just going to fire people, right? It's not his style. He's not going to cite budget cuts as a reason for getting rid of people that he has nothing for creatively. There are a couple of exceptions. He's let some people go. Exceptional circumstances, of course. People like Jimmy Havoc, for example, Evil East, disciplinary reasons. A couple more wrestlers like B. Priestley, who weren't able to travel to the shows, able to get to the United States. Sadie Gibbs, another one. Exceptions to the rule, of course. But he's not just cutting people willy-nilly without good reason before the end of their deals. And neither should he. It's a cold, callous business practice, and one that WWE has drawn a right amount of flack for over the past couple of years. But to cycle back to that point about wrestlers signed, year 1 wrestlers in AEW, the company's needs are obviously a lot different in 2022 than they were in 2019. And thus, yeah, I mean, people are going to have their contracts run out. Some of them aren't going to be renewed. That's how contracts work at the end of the day, and it's certainly a lot less egregious than just swiping someone off and firing them years before their deal expires. Yep, still sucks. Think about people losing their jobs. That's never good, but it's not the same as what happens in other companies. In one other company. You know what I mean. But regardless, even when these wrestlers do leave at the end of their contract, Tony Khan is still going to sign people. You telling me that if Brock Lesnar became available tomorrow, you wouldn't sign him purely because you have, I don't know, 10, 15 guys who wrestle almost exclusively on Dark and Elevation? It's not going to happen. He's going to keep snapping wrestlers up, so even as people leave, more will come in, and that number will be topped up. And ideally, you want to be able to use everybody that's currently under contract to your company on TV every single week. That's utopia. Everyone's getting a fair shake of it, everyone's on TV, everyone's working, everyone's employed, and everyone's happy. That, unfortunately, with the current number of wrestlers, is impossible. 3 hours of television just isn't enough. But what I'm saying is that 5 or 6 hours of programming might be enough. I'm saying that the solution, in my opinion, is YouTube. Adding another hour onto Dynamite, that's not going to work for a lot of people. One of the biggest problems with Raw and WWE in general over the past few years as far as the layout of the programming goes is that third hour. It's Turns out it's incredibly difficult to write 3 hours of TV for one show every single week. Doing it all in one block is exhausting for the viewer, and you look at that third hour viewership drop off that happens for Raw every week, it's not ideal. Not ideal at all. Similarly, adding another hour to Rampage, well, the show already starts at 10 PM. How late do you want to go? And on top of that, you add another weekly show to the schedule, and well, where do you put it? You can't go head to head with Raw or SmackDown. That's not a great idea. Beyond that, you've not got a whole host of options. So what I propose is you take a couple of shows that already exist and you do more with them. You don't add new shows, you take Dark and Dark Elevation and turn them into something bigger. These YouTube shows exist primarily as kind of pseudo-developmental shows. They're there to give undercard or younger wrestlers the reps. They're there to pad records. Sometimes you'll get the odd competitive match here and there, maybe a couple a week or whatever, but they are certainly the exception rather than the rule. And similarly, you'll get the odd storyline here and there as well. Joey Janela versus Sonny Kiss, Brandon Cutler versus Peter Avalon. These things sometimes exclusively play out on Dark, but they don't happen all that often, and really, unless you just really love squash matches or you are an AEW completionist, there aren't a whole lot of reasons to keep up with these two shows every week. AEW hasn't done a whole lot to make Dark and Elevation feel like must-watch shows, and to be fair, I don't think that's really been their intention either. But at the same time, there's not really a whole lot on these things to hook you in, to pull you in and to keep you coming back as a viewer. Yep, these are fun, functional broadcasts, and you can obviously pick and choose the squashes you want to see and the ones that maybe you don't have time for. But at the same time, you know, it's not so much that these are like the B shows to Rampage and Dynamite, which would be the A. They're probably closer to D or E at this stage. And the format of these shows and the way they're presented has created the perception that Dark and Elevation are skippable. You don't need to tune into them because you're not going to miss anything if you don't. And that's entirely fair. If you look at the average card, you're going to see some fun stuff. You're going to see some free agents coming in and working squashes. You're going to see some of your favorite stars looking great. You're going to see people developing, growing, learning as performers. It's not the same as Dynamite or Rampage though, is it? And that's no disrespect to the wrestlers involved. They are all extremely talented. Some of the best wrestlers in this company are on that show, and some of the brightest young prospects in the entire sport, your Lee Moriartys and whatnot. But at the same time, we have this problem where if somebody works Dark or Elevation, immediately a sect of fans will go, that's a relegation. They're being punished. They're not on television. What AEW has to do if it wants to solve its roster bloat problem and turn its massive talent crew into an advantage is to get rid of that perception by turning Dark and Elevation around. If you make these shows feel more important, if you make them feel like you have to tune in or you're going to miss some big important development, it's not going to be seen as a relegation. Now that isn't to say that every week of Dark should feel as important as every week of Dynamite, but the gap should be a lot smaller than what it currently is. How do you do that? You do it by booking stars. You do it by booking a more conventional wrestling television show, storylines, angles, good promos, a few more competitive matches here and there, without completely losing sight of the developmental goals either, because that needs to be a big part of the YouTube series. This is a good place for people to kind of hone their craft, if you will. The way I see it, the ideal version of these shows is kind of like what I would refer to as like the glory days of NXT, before the show went on USA Network, when it was a combination of all-star stuff and rookie stuff. People learning and people growing with storylines, feuds. Make it must-watch TV. And if you do that, if you make it a more investable show, if you will, you can tie the whole thing together on TNT and TBS. Weekly recaps. Hey, look at the cool stuff that's going on YouTube that you didn't see. You're really going to have to tune in this week because it's going to be great. Run through some stuff that happened on the recent shows, which we sometimes get, but not all that often, and preview it as well. you can attract a lot more people to these shows if you flash up a match graphic saying, if you tune into Elevation this week, you're going to see, I don't know, Dante Martin and Kenny Omega. It's lots of great possibilities here, and you only need to look back at the success of early dark matches like Omega versus Janela, the first one, which was incredibly well received, to see how this might work. What you need to do is show the audience that there are hooks to this show, and you need to catch them with them, because at the moment there really aren't all that many. Dark is fun, Elevation is fun, but there's not a lot of meat on those bones. If you beef them out, however, and you tie them into your overall TV product, I think that's how you solve the problem of roster bloat. It won't be seen as bloat if, say, Tony Nese, who I spoke about earlier, if he wrestles 5 matches on Dark instead of Dynamite or Rampage, but Dark doesn't feel like the D show it does now, that's not a problem anymore. It goes away. You change the perception, the problem doesn't exist anymore. Because as far as I can see, the only other solutions are you stop signing so many wrestlers, but why would you leave first-class talent on the board when you can pick them up? That doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. Or you cut people from the roster prematurely, which again only works if you're from Stamford and you lack a heart. But anyway guys, that's my take on a solution to AEW's perceived roster bloat problem. Dark and Elevation, make them more, make them mean something. Combine the developmental approach we currently have with storytelling and more competitive in-ring action, and I'm pretty confident that you can change the idea that only wrestling on these shows is some kind of relegation. Either way, let us know in the comments section below. After you've done that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Then you can follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me at Andy H. Murray, where you can tell me how wrong I am. Goodbye.